because our time is so slim, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and then, you know, others will join in as we go along. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shaquilla Smith, and I am so happy to be here with you all today with my colleague, Renee Skutnik, and we're going to introduce ourselves in a moment and then talk about the session that we're offering today. But just, we have the slide up just to make sure that you are in the right place. So our session today is creating conditions for a spiritually grounded, beloved community. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute, but I just wanted to introduce myself. As I said, I'm Shaquilla Smith, and I'm the Vice President for Organizational Culture at the Fetzer Institute, which is a foundation in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And in my role, I lead our organization's efforts to, let me stop sharing so I can see you a little bit, but and you can see me fully. I lead our organization's efforts at what I call mission integration, or how it is that we walk our talk, and that we ensure that our vision and our values are enacted throughout everything that we do in our organization. And so as part of that, human resources is in our department, our community spiritual work is in that department, which I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on today. And then our diversity, equity, and inclusion work is also in our department, which I think is really helpful because having all of those things integrated ensures that all of that work goes throughout the organization. So I love what I do. It's some of the most beautiful and holy and challenging work that I've ever done in my career. And so I'm really excited to share some of my inquiries and learnings with you. So Renee, did you want to just introduce yourself before I talk a little bit more about the session?
Sure. And if anybody hears my cat, I'm sorry, he's decided to join me at this moment. But my name is Renee Skutnik, and I'm the Organizational Culture and HR Specialist at the Fetzer Institute. So like Shaquilla mentioned, HR is embedded in our overall org culture department. I provide administrative and programmatic support around our org development activities and initiatives, which is centered around our DEI related efforts. And both Shaquilla and I are part of a larger org culture team. And even though we're leading the DEI efforts, you know, we do have external consultants in our DEI committee who are on the journey with us. And I will turn it back over to you, Shaquilla.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thank you for bringing the rest of the team into the space. So Renee and I are here today, but we have a whole team and community that is sort of like the wind beneath our wings, so to speak. So what are we up to today in this conversation? Creating conditions for a spiritually grounded, beloved community. That title came from really our goal statement for our org culture work and our spiritual work. And I just want to unpack that a little bit. You know, today we're going to be talking about how do you hold or create conditions for deep change within organizational context. And so this notion of creating conditions, and sometimes I even add an infrastructure, is this acknowledgement that as change agents, we can't force change or do change onto people, that we are not willing to engage ourselves. And that also really it's about creating conditions and infrastructure that invite people into deeper becoming, right? That it's not a forcing. The other part too is this whole notion of spiritually grounded. I'm holding that very spaciously. We do consider ourselves a spiritually grounded organization. at Fetzer, we're not a faith community. I often talk about us having this notion of radical pluralism. We include people from all the faith traditions or no tradition, all different spiritual paths in our community. And so it's really a spacious view of that. And then finally, this notion of beloved community is a particular signal as well that I'm holding. And I'm using beloved community in the same way that Martin Luther King talked about it, and not as this sort of sentimental idea about what love is, but, you know, it includes love, yes, but a real fierce love that includes social and economic justice, radical inclusiveness, right, like all are welcome, and then deep mutuality between us. So I just wanted to ground us in that when I'm talking about it, because all of those things are really together for me, in my mind, and the way that we think about it. So as we invite you into this conversation with us and this inquiry again around how do you do deep change in a developmental, holistic, and spiritually grounded way, we are going to start off. I'll invite you into a contemplative practice for a minute. We'll have some small and large group reflection and conversation, and I'll take some time to give you sort of an overview of how we're holding and thinking about this work. Again, not as an exemplar or because we got it right, but just as the spark conversation. So that's sort of the flow of today. We only have 60 minutes, so it might feel like a roller coaster, strap in a little bit, but hopefully we'll have a little bit of spaciousness and fun together. So, okay, that's what we're up to. Now I just wanted to invite you into a practice, right, to slow us down for a minute. And part of this is, so one of our organizational practices is that we start all of our meetings or time together with either centering silence or some sort of contemplative practice. So just for this short time together, we're going to create a beloved community amongst ourselves here. So I want to offer a centering or grounding practice that brings us into this space together and to really ground you in the offering for today. And I'm actually adapting a mindfulness practice from Adrienne Maree Brown, so I'm bringing her into our beloved community right now. That is an embodied practice and meant to ground you in your sense of purpose and fullness as well, with this idea that more you is always better and is welcomed and then needed for our collective future. So if you could just come into a comfortable posture, and just as I always like to say before I start these things off for people that some people find embodied practices challenging, and that's okay. So I would just ask you, if it doesn't feel comfortable for you, to just stop doing it. You can look out your window or play some music, just mute yourself so that we don't hear you. But, you know, whenever something feels uncomfortable, just stop. So, but right now you can come into a comfortable posture. It might be helpful to, I see a lot of people have their videos off, that's fine too. A seated posture, standing posture. If you're at a standing desk, you can even lay down if you want to, but just come comfortably into your body. And then close your eyes, or you can leave them partially open. And then just begin bringing your awareness into your body, right? Just connecting with your breath. And just notice what is, without any judgment or without trying to fix anything. You can notice things in your external environment, like the temperature or any ambient sounds, or your internal environment, like what's your mood? Do you have any sensations in your body right now? And just noticing, not trying to fix or diagnose anything. Now I'm going to invite you to briefly engage all parts of yourself, all parts and corners of who you are, your fullness. And in this practice, just let your breath guide you into your body, into your center. And for many human bodies, the center is about 2 inches below the belly button, so you can bring your awareness there. And if you want to, you can even put your palm on your lower abdomen if that helps. The center, and just breathe into that space. And then from this center, fill into length, right? So let your length be long. I want you to take in the length of yourself and just feel the sensations or energetic quality of the length of you, bringing your awareness from the soles of your feet up through your legs to the top of your head. And then from the length of you, center in your width, right? Let your width be wide here. Sometimes I like to picture the body as a sacred scroll that's kind of unfurling from the spine, almost like you have wings there, a scroll, and just picture your shoulders going from left to right or right to left, and your hips, all the outer edges of you. And then from that space, I want you to center in your depths now. So let your depths be deep here. And this might feel like full relaxation, just rooting yourself and feeling into the depths of all of you, who you are, right? So here, you can ground into your seat and your feet. You can move from the front of your heart to the back, your stomach to the back, noticing yourself as a three-dimensional being. And now in the fullness of you, just become aware of your purpose. Feel into your purpose. And as you consider our collective future, what is it that you love? What is it that you most long for? And whatever vision you have of our collective future, who is it that you must be in order to serve that vision? And just feel all the love and longing in the center of your being and let it fill you up with purpose. And if you have a commitment rising, you might speak it to yourself right now, right? Even whisper it a bit. Let your length be long. Let your width be wide. Let your depth be deep. And feel yourself on purpose. And then just end with a couple of deep breaths. And then I'll invite you back into the space. And if you would like to offer any commitments that came up in your awareness during that, you can enter them into the chat for everybody. And as you do that, I will pass it along to Renee, who will lead us in some more reflection and conversation.
Thank you, Shaquilla. So we just had a moment of grounding and a little bit of time for reflection to start us into our topic this morning. And we want to try and to invite everyone's voices in some way to start. So I want everyone to just take a moment to think about a question I'm going to ask, and then we will have you respond to it in a poll. And this poll relates directly to our session topic and the methods and the approach that we're implementing at Fetzer. So the question is, and you should see the poll pop up soon, do you see a connection between DEI and faith and spirituality or inner work? So hopefully everyone will see the poll soon. And if you can kind of think about it and submit your response. And then as soon as we've got a majority of the responses in, we will share the poll results for everyone. All right, so now everyone should be able to view the poll results, and we can see that we've got 83% saying yes to there's a connection between DEI and faith and spirituality inner work, and a couple people answering they're unsure. So in looking at these results, if you can think about your own answer or just in general, you know, what came up for when you tried to answer this? You know, what were you thinking when you answered? And if anybody would like to reflect or share on this, you can feel free to unmute and share your answer verbally, or if you're more comfortable, you can share in the chat. But we'd like to open up just a small discussion here on why you may have decided to pick your answer and what came up for you as you were trying to answer that question.
Hi, this is Rhonda. I'll answer that question. For me, what I first thought of was when I first started doing DE&I work, like as a main thing for my organization. So I work for Volunteers of America, a national nonprofit. And we're a ministry of service. And we really started going deep in terms of some really difficult topics, you know, and it was triggering for folks. And one of my colleagues said, you know, we need to incorporate some sort of, you know, trauma awareness or something to help us as we go on this journey. And I struggled with it at first. I was just like, and I had to hear that several times before it really dawned on me that the spiritual aspect, you know, the inner work that we're asking people to do as part of this process is absolutely necessary. And we had to incorporate opportunities for people to do that work in the sessions, you know, in our education sessions throughout the day, and incorporate it as a key part of what we're doing. So I just wanted to share that as an example. I didn't start off believing that this would work or that this was important, an important part of DE&I. But as I got into the work, I realized it was critical, and it changed us. We continue to evolve, and we continue to go deeper, and we continue to create connection across different because we've incorporated spirituality and inner work into our work, our process.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. That sounds really great. It sure is a journey, right? Like there's a lot of learning points in different areas where you kind of have to stop and think, and having that ingrained in there can really be helpful for people during this journey. I just want to read a couple of people's responses that they put in the chat. DEI to me means that you have to care for people. You have to allow yourself to feel and care about what others are going through, their lived experience, etc. You have to be rooted and grounded in faith or spirituality in order to take that on, especially on a daily basis. Thank you. And the frame I use is racial equity and not DEI, as DEI is too generic. Centering racial equity brings the fullness of BIPOC into communities, into our spiritual communities, and into healing. Thank you. Thank you both. We have a little bit of time too. If anybody who marked unsure wants to share, there's nothing wrong with any of those answers, and we're definitely interested in hearing what you might have to say. So no pressure, but if somebody who marked unsure wants to share either in the chat or verbally, that would be wonderful to just kind of hear.
I think we, I don't know how you pronounce your name, Leadine has her hand raised.
Oh.
Okay. How do you say your name?
Whenever someone says, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, I'm like, that's me.
Sorry.
It's all good. It's okay. It's Ladine, like Nadine, but with an L.
Yeah,
and
beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. My parents made it up, but I'm just grateful for the space. And Shaquilla, I had actually tried to contact you. So I think Shaquilla. Okay. Yeah. I think it's divine that I showed up and you're here. So that's great. But actually, I'm echoing what I was hearing Rhonda say. And also one of the people in the chat who talked about DEI being generic and really focusing on racial consciousness. But for me, and I believe this is just my journey, it could be different for different people. But as one who has and continues to work on eliminating institutionalized racism, I resonated very much with Dr. Han Ren when she showed the quote from Paulo Freire. And it is so easy to become the oppressor. So how do I, in eliminating the racism I've internalized, and then working with others to do the same, not reproduce the same injury, and being able to recognize that white supremacy, race, is rooted in a faulty sense of the self, that it is rooted in ego, which is about power over separation. It's, in my view, a false self. So for me, the journey is to connect to and align with the truth, the big T, of who I am and who we each are in my view. And so when I am facilitating, it is from a place of holding a transformational space of healing and a return to the truth of who we be. And what I'll say lastly is, there's Chevy, we've been sharing a lot of space this week. When I was teaching 8th grade, because I started as a classroom teacher in a community very similar to the one I was educated in, and I recognized the power of beliefs and consciousness, and that my children, had already internalized, and these were all children of color, mostly Black, that they weren't smart, that they weren't good at school. So for me to teach them, physical science, there was not fertile soil. So it's like I had to back up and remind them and actually infuse into my teaching the truth of who they be. Okay, their beauty, their brilliance, their goodness, their greatness. Okay, and that to me is the divinity of who we each are. And so I think that was my beginning. And then kind of my healer's journey, heal thyself, and now being a metaphysician, very clear that that which is out there is in me. So as I've heard that refrain in the last several days, and even as you have said it, that for me is the base of my racial equity work. Okay, because when white people or any people, but particularly white people, get defensive, it's because of a wound. So I don't want to meet the defensiveness with a smackdown, although it can be enticing at times. I don't want to do that because it's just injury on top of injury. And that's why for me, this is definitely spirituality embedded in and connected to the work that I do.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. That, and actually, yeah, I feel like you are moving us into like some of the other sharings too. So and I'm looking at the chat, you all are sharing some really good stuff in there. So thank you for that. I think, should we go on, Renee?
Yeah, sure. Just in interest of time, it's a great conversation. We'll hopefully have a little bit more time in your small groups or large group to go back into this. So I don't mean to cut anybody off. But Shaquilla is going to kind of now get into some of the meat of what we're doing at the Fetzer Institute in our case study. So go ahead, Shaquilla.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that, Renee. Yeah, it looks like that prompt opened up some real reflection for folks. So thank you for engaging in it. So yeah, I'm gonna, can you all see my screen well?
Yes, it is up.
You see the PowerPoint? Great, okay, good. So again, we have a short amount of time and we want you all to engage in conversations with each other around this. So I'm gonna move through a lot of information a little bit quickly, but mainly to provide a brief and high-level overview of how we're thinking about and holding our DEI work at Fetzer. And again, not as an exemplar, because I think, you know, this work is hard and messy, and but more as a case study of how one might engage a spiritually grounded, holistic and developmental approach to beloved community. And so at Fetzer, some people were already talking about Rev Angel's work. So, you know, she's in the space as well with us. And at Fetzer, we talk a lot about this relationship between personal and societal transformation, recognizing that you can't have one without the other, as people were just reflecting on. And these quotes really get at that, I think, in the deep, but they also get at this deeper dimension of why we're doing this work and what the call and the actual invitation is of this collective liberation work that is really about who we are as humans and sacred beings, and then also who we are to each other, and what does love look like in that? Right. So the other thing that these are getting at too, which is you know, what we were just talking about a minute ago, is that our outsides have to, our insides have to match our outsides, or another way of saying it is that our external expression is really a reflection of our interior reality. So again, just grounding in that notion. And then here is, you know, this is our DEI intent statement, and we're showing this really to illustrate how deeply grounded in our mission this is. So Fetzer's mission is helping build the spiritual foundation for a loving world. And so, you know, what does that mean exactly? I'll pause here and let you just take a minute to read. This is our DEI intent statement and how we're thinking about it. So I just offer this here. The main thing to just say about this is that this work is central to creating a loving world, right? That's how we see it. Similarly to how the quotes in the previous slide were offering. And for any organization, but particularly for us, when we see this work as mission critical, I think it really animates in a different way how we do the work, especially when it gets hard, because this work is beautiful, but it's not easy, right? And so if we have this notion that DEI is not an add-on to our mission or something that's nice to do, but in fact, we are not fulfilling our organizational mission if we are not incorporating this work into it. I think that kind of like raises the stakes a little bit. So I wanted to just offer this 4 roles framework for an equitable future. I don't know if people are familiar with this. It was developed by Ron McKinley, who's from the Minnesota Council of Foundations, and I learned about it through Trista Harris, who is a futurist and does a lot of work around creating equitable futures. And I really thought that this framework is really a good way to think about how foundations, but also program providers can think holistically about how their insides match their outsides. And Renee is going to put in the chat box for later, in case some of you want to explore this framework a little bit more. Trista Harris has this really lovely kind of like 20-minute overview of it, but I'll just say a little bit about it. Here, basically, this framework offers that foundations and nonprofits have 4 roles that they can focus on when they want to make their organizational culture more equitable, and that these 4 legs, as Trista talks about them, need to be addressed in that work, right? So the first part is that we're a funder or a program provider, foundations are, in that there's a grant-making role or a program-providing role that we have, that we can think about our equity work externally in that way. And then you're also a community citizen or someone that has influence or a voice and a platform to move ideas forward. We're also an employer, right? All of us are, in terms of us hiring and retaining staff and also creating workplace cultures. And then finally, we function as economic entities that have money and, money that we're investing and spending. So these are the 4 places where you can really think about how to create equitable futures. And here we're doing work at all of these different areas at Fetzer. But I'm going to focus today's session on our role as an employer and the work that we're doing in terms of building our workplace culture and our beloved community as a spiritually grounded community. So here, I don't want to go into all the details for these, but I did want to put them up because these are the guiding principles and intentions that inform our team's DEI work that we're using. I will say one that often gets, that activates people sometimes is this including invitation and choice one. So I'll just say something about that. For us, we are very clear, as I said before, that our mission, that doing this work is critical to our mission and is part of our mission. And so we are moving in this direction and doing this work as an organization. And so there are parts of it that the whole community is expected to sort of take up, right? And we also know, again, that you cannot force change onto people and that people are at different stages in their journey. So we've brought in different pieces that are invitational for people to step into. So I'll just say that. And then the other thing that I wanted to say something about is this notion of how it takes action and a long view. So we're constantly thinking about how do we stay on the path and then also know that the path takes a while to get to, right? That in some ways we may not even reach the destination in my lifetime, but I'll continue to work towards it. And then also, I one last thing, that it does include joy and rest. So I just need to put that out there, because again, this work is hard, and how do we do it with generativity, joy, and sustainability? Okay, so in the way that I hold my practice, my professional and personal practice or research, is I usually consider work at all of these three levels. And similarly with our DEI work, it really takes a holistic approach in designing offerings and interventions at each of these levels, so that we're thinking about it at the individual level, the interpersonal level, how we are together and what that work looks like, and then at the organizational level. And I'll say a little bit more about each of these as we go through, but I wanted to mention them because I think in any kind of organizational development work, these are sort of the three different levels that one can focus their efforts in and should address in their efforts. Okay, so building off of the previous slide, we're going, you know, from bigger to more focused here. This adds a little more layer and detail. So I'll start with the outer ring here, the supports and resources, or what I often think about as the holding environment for the work, right? This, and it acknowledges, you know, exactly what people were saying in our previous conversation, that this work is hard and it makes all sorts of mental, emotional, and spiritual demands on people to do the work. And so the question is, how can we create environments that both support and challenge people to continue to grow over the long term and to do this work? So this, I'll talk more about what that means very specifically in the upcoming slides. And then the COFG part stands for our Community of Freedom gatherings. So I mentioned that we are a spiritually grounded community, and we call ourselves a community of freedom, which comes from our founder. But we have a structure in place to do our individual and communal spiritual work that takes the form of weekly 3-hour gatherings that we have, that all staff participate in, from our culinary staff and groundskeepers to our finance staff and our CEO, right? So everybody participates in them, and we've been doing this for almost 10 years now, and it's about 9 years at this point, so a long time. And this is a really beautiful holding and real estate, frankly, in some ways, within which to do this spiritual work, but also the DEI work. And so inside those gears there, this, again, we have work that we do individually in small groups, which I'll say a little bit more about momentarily, and then as a full community that is, you know, nested within this larger holding environment of very intentional supports and resources that we put in place, and intentional structures that we hold to be able to do this work. So this is what I think of as our DEI framework in terms of how we think about this internal work, and all of these pieces really capture the spiritually grounded, holistic, and developmental aspects of the work. And I'll go through these, you know, relatively quickly, but so that you kind of get the point of it. So I talked a little bit about supports and resources, and I'll say something more about that in the next slide. But that basically includes the emotional, spiritual, and learning support structures and resources. Again, I'll say a little bit more about the emotional and spiritual pieces in just a moment. But in terms of the learning support pieces, we do pay particular attention to making offerings for people that they can access on their own. We have an intranet site for people's individual learning over time. And they have that space, again, in those community of freedom gatherings, because we have about 4 or 5 of those a month, right? Because they're weekly, and they alternate between time that people have just to do on their own, and then time that we use as a full community for some of this work. And then the capacity and skills, again, gets to the developmental piece. Again, recognizing that this work makes demands or requires specific personal and interpersonal capacities, right, that people were talking about. Are you able to hold conflict? What happens when you get activated? Your nervous system gets activated in the course of doing some of this work. Are you able to manage that? How do you have difficult conversations? How are you able to listen with presence and openness to somebody's story, even when it's difficult, right? So those are some of the sessions and things that we attend to in that capacity building piece. And the READY circles down there, that stands for Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Circles. I mentioned that we were working with a small group structure that is meant to provide space for staff to, in smaller groupings, and this one is invitational, in smaller groupings of 5 or 6 people, to be in deeper conversation in an ongoing manner around issues of racial equity. And so we structured those intentionally for the community, provided facilitation training for staff who said that they wanted to, hold space for those. We provided the structure, and they include, contemplative practice and ongoing inquiry prompts, and those meet monthly, and we have about 50% of our staff participating in those right now. So that's pretty exciting for us. And those have been spaces of deep learning, and we check in monthly with them to see if they need any support and to see how things are going with those. And then the final one is knowledge and context. And that, I think, is these are the educational offerings that I think people typically think of when they think about this work organizationally. And we offer those monthly with our consultants. And here, the stuff on there are just examples of content that we've offered. And it's usually, we develop the curriculum with our consultants to kind of build up. We didn't start off with talking about white supremacy, for example, right? We started off with people understanding what it means to have an identity, and then moving up as we go along to deeper and more challenging content. And that's usually interspersed with some of these capacity building contents. Okay, so that was quick. And then this is the last piece here, a little bit more about that support structure, again, to support this work, because if we know that this work challenges people and we want them to be doing the work in an ongoing fashion, how do you build an intentional support structure? So the first one is mutual peer support. The READY circles fulfill that. And then we also have a structure that we were working with to pair people up with other members of staff, again, just to process the content that was coming up or any activations that were coming up. And I would say some of those READY circles, I forgot to mention, meet in affinity groups, right? So we have some people opted to do groups of just white folks or groups of women together, talking about some of these issues and intersections. The second piece is a spiritual care support, and we have developed this with one of our partners and grantees, Mystic Soul, that has a lot of experience working at the intersection of race and spirituality and social justice around community care teams, which involve a small group of staff who would volunteer to have a little bit of extra training to support other staff members who might be struggling with some of this content. And some of that includes trauma-informed work, when to refer out when somebody needs more support than what we can offer internally, and just how to like be present to somebody else's story. And then the third piece is this outside professional support, which includes spiritual coaches and directors, trauma resources, other service providers in the community, and making sure that these are regularly available. And then I would just say that we do have the usual mental health benefits to support this, and we make sure staff know about them, like employee assistance programming. And we also have spiritual development benefits for staff that they could use, like say if they did want to access a spiritual director or coach. So that was like a very quick movement through that. I know that's a lot to take in, and that's just to scratch the surface of some of our stuff, but hopefully it just gives you, you know, a little more flesh into what this could look like, you know, in an organizational context around what we're doing. Again, it's not something that everybody can do. We're not holding it up as, you know, this is how people should do it, but this is how we've enacted some of these things on a practical level. So, yeah, I think I'm just looking at time, and I want to make space for you all to be able to talk. But so maybe what we can do is I want to move us into the small groups. Renee can do that, but maybe if you have questions, to put them in the chat box, and then I can see about answering them. And of course, we're available outside of this space too to answer questions for people. So I'll turn it over to Renee.
Sure. Do you want to cut the small groups down a little bit since we're running short? I don't want to get everybody back and then immediately end. So I was thinking maybe maybe 7 minutes. 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we'll go with 7 minutes. So I am going to, we'll break out very shortly here, but I'm going to put the prompt we kind of want you to think about in the chat. And it really is just related to what we've been offering, and hopefully an opportunity for you in a small group to discuss it a little bit more. And then hopefully when we get back, you'll have some time as a large group to maybe share. We'll see how much time you have. So just kind of what comes up for you when you think about the intersection between DEI work and inner work and inner dimensions that are related to that. Hopefully you'll be in groups of about 3 to 4 people, and we'll have about 7 minutes. And I'm putting the prompt in the chat there, and breakout rooms should be opening soon for everyone. So if you see something pop up, go ahead and join it when it pops up. Hey.
Hey, I was
Y'all are doing
talking so fast, I
fantastic.
barely breathe.
What'd you say, Elaine?
I said you're doing fantastic. This is great.
Thanks.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Did Nikisha not want to join a small group?
Not sure what's going on with that. It's
I mean,
possible.
it's
to
very
Oh,
pause.
maybe she
Yeah.
they might have stepped away or something.
Yeah.
Hey there, I'm working on it.
Okay.
Oh, good. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a short time, isn't it, Shaquilla?
I
feel
know,
like-
that's why I was like, oh gosh.
Well, did you see what Rhonda said? They want
I
us to
did
present
see
to their
that.
organization. Okay, do you want me to copy that so we've got the info?
Yeah, yep, that's
Okay.
great. Yeah.
Okay. Oops,
Yeah.
keeps.
And maybe when they come back, you can just mention that that we'll contact her. But I think you have to wait till she comes back, because if you put it in now,
Yeah, it'll go. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so weird. Like it won't let you see it. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I'm just writing down her contact
Did you
information.
all, at least, I don't know if you wanted to pause the recording, so yeah, I've done that before.
I always just forget to stop and then like record people afterwards who are hanging out and talking in meetings. All right. Looks like we're seeing a majority of people on their way back in. I'll give it just a minute more. I don't remember how many people we had to start, so I should have looked at that. And okay, everyone's back. All right. So we are running really close to time, but we did want to give an opportunity for anybody to kind of talk about how that went for you. What did you and your group talk about? Did you have any insights or questions? And just a reminder to kind of share your own story and maybe not what you might have heard from someone else, but feel free to put it in the chat as well. I know we're kind of running close to time, but if there is one person that would like to share, feel free to unmute. Thank you for that, Rhonda. And I did see your note and I have your email address. Just wanted to note that. Yes, go ahead, Antoinette. I said that right.
I mentioned this in the group that I'm curious to how you're working with the stretchiness of the practice, because what you offered is actually, and I would say probably for folks of color, this is not like a new practice. So I'm curious, so it's a stretch for probably people, white folks who don't have to like work with this kind of a practice. So that's a stretch when there's differences there. So I'm curious, like, what are the ways that you are building beloved community when people are different places?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Shaquilla talk too. I think that's part of the supports and resources, and kind of part of the intentionality of what we're doing is hopefully starting at places where people can enter, and then also providing additional things for people who maybe are farther along on their journey, and making it an invitation. So that's really important. People have to be ready for change, but we at Fetzer, like Shaquilla said, this is a part of our mission. So when you work here, you kind of come in knowing what some of those expectations are. But I'll let you add, Shaquilla.
Yeah, no, I often talk about our work as I'm also a trained yoga instructor, and so I think about it as an all levels yoga class, and the challenge of teaching all levels classes, because you have people who are at the beginning of their journey and then other people who have a very advanced practice. And so I think that's part of, we try to, in our individual sessions and content, offer something new that everybody could, engage in. And then the work is never done. Even people who've been doing this work for ages, it's still a demand for everybody. So I think, again, like when you do it at this deep level, it's something near for everybody.
Yes. Well, we are just about at time. I want to thank everyone for being with us. I hope your small group was helpful for you. You know, again, at Fetzer, we're really working around this idea that spirituality and inner work are important and they're a part of our DEI journey. But we invite you to continue to think about this and what nuanced ways you might be able to do this work in a transformative way, because what we offered is just one way and that's how it works for us. So that's kind of what we wanted to leave you with. So again, thank you all. Thanks for joining us. We hit 1 p.m. We're on time, somewhat. All right. Thank you all.